The invisible frame, the grand galleria, shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each facet catching light like trapped stars. Amara knew her adjusted the sleeve of her midnight blue gown, a piece she had painstakingly restored from her grandmother's wedding trousseau. The delicate silver threadwork caught the light as she moved, though no one seemed to notice. "Darling, there you are." Dawood Mirza's voice carried the practiced warmth he reserved for public appearances. He placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward a cluster of potential investors. "Remember, the Jensens are interested in the Ottoman collection. Mention your work on the imperial kaftan, but keep it brief."
Amara nodded.
A practiced smile settling on her face. After 8 years of marriage to one of Lahore's most prominent gallery owners, she knew her role: be charming, be knowledgeable, but never outshine. "This is my wife, Amara Dawood," introduced her to the circle of guests. "She heads our textile conservation department." "How fascinating," said a woman dripping in diamonds that outweighed her interest. "Is that like cleaning old clothes?" Before Amara could respond, Dawood laughed.
Ah!
"Something like that? Amara, why don't you get Mrs. Jensen some champagne while I tell them about the new exhibition space?" The dismissal was subtle but clear. Amara moved toward the bar, her expertise 15 years of specialized training in historical textile preservation reduced to cleaning old clothes. The gallery's 5th anniversary celebration continued around her, a testament to Dawood's vision and business acumen. Few remembered it had been her family connections and her initial restoration projects that had put the Grand Galleria on the map. "The usual, Mrs. Mirza?" asked Farid, the bartender who had worked every gallery event for years. "Please." She accepted the sparkling water with lime, watching as Dawood charmed the room. He was handsome in that polished way that photographed. Well, for art magazines, sharp cheekbones, precisely trimmed beard, and bespoke suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he's quite good at this, isn't he? A deep voice with a slight Spanish accent came from beside her. Amara turned to find herself looking at Julian Castellano, the reclusive photographer whose haunting portraits had caused a sensation in the art world. His presence at their gala was a coup that Wood had been boasting about for weeks. "Mr. Castellano, I didn't realize you were attending tonight." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Julian, please," and I almost didn't. "These events are rarely worth the uncomfortable shoes." He nodded toward her. "I came because I heard the woman who restored the Mughal wedding veil would be here." Surprise flickered across Amara's face. "You know my work?" "I know exceptional craftsmanship when I see it. That veil tells stories in its threads that my camera could never capture." He tilted his head, though I admit I expected someone older. Genuine laugh escaped her. "I started young. My grandmother was a master embroiderer for royal families." Across the room, Dawood's gaze found her. His eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of his wife, engaged in conversation with the evening's most prestigious guest. "Amara," he called, gesturing impatiently. "Could you bring that champagne?" Julian's eyebrow raised slightly. "Duty calls?" "Always." She offered an apologetic smile before turning away. "Mrs. Mirza," Julian said, stopping her, "that veil restoration, the patience it required to bring back what others couldn't see, was still there. That's rare." Something in his words settled in her chest like a warm stone. When was the last time someone had seen her where Creely seen it? As she moved through the crowd toward Dawood, champagne in hand, she felt Julian's gaze following her. For the first time that evening, Amara stood a little straighter, the silver threads in her grandmother's handiwork catching the light with each step. Echoes in silver, the crystal clinked against silver as Julian Castellano rose from his seat, commanding the attention of the room with his quiet authority. Amara watched from her position beside Dawood, wondering what the famously private photographers might say about her husband's gallery. "I've attended countless exhibitions and galas across 6 continents," Julian began, his voice carrying easily through the now silent room. Most blurred together in a haze of pretension and mediocre champagne. A ripple of nervous laughter followed. "But occasionally, I encounter work that reminds me why art matters." Dawood straightened, preening slightly, clearly expecting praise. For his business acumen, an eye for valuable collections. Tonight, I find myself moved not by what hangs on these walls, but by the invisible art of preservation, the hands that ensure our cultural heritage survives. Julian's gaze found Amara. I raise my glass to Amara Newer, whose restoration of the imperial Mughal veil represents the highest form of artistry. Her work doesn't merely clean or repair, it breathes life back into forgotten histories. The silence in the room deepened as all eyes turned toward Amara. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, her fingers tightening around her water glass. What few people know, Julian continued, is that the Metropolitan Museum attempted that restoration 3 times before declaring the piece beyond salvation. Yet in Amara's hands, it was reborn. To the true artist in the room whose name should be on the building rather than merely in the staff directory, I salute you. He raised his glass higher, and after a moment of stunned silence, others followed suit. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as people tried to reconcile the quiet woman they'd overlooked with this apparently world-class talent in their midst. Dawood's hand found hers under the table, his fingers digging painfully into her wrist. His smile remained fixed, but his voice was a hissed whisper. What is this? Did you arrange this spectacle? No, I barely spoke to him, Amara whispered back, equally bewildered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Suddenly people who had brushed past her for years wanted to hear about her restoration techniques. Gallery owners who had only ever addressed Dawood now handed her their cards directly. Through it all, Julian observed from a distance, occasionally catching her eye with a subtle nod. Later, as their driver navigated the quiet streets toward their home in Goldberg, Dawood finally broke his seething silence. You humiliated me tonight, Amara. Turned from the window, genuinely confused. How could I possibly have humiliated you? I didn't ask for that toast. 8 years I've built this gallery's reputation. And in 5 minutes, that man made it sound like you're the talent behind everything. He loosened his tie with agitated movements. People were looking at me like I've been hiding you in the basement, haven't you? When was the last time my name appeared on an exhibition catalog? When did you last mention my work to journalists? You introduced me as the head of textile conservation, as if I'm a glorified laundress. I gave you a department, Amara. Most wives would be grateful for the opportunity. Most wives wouldn't have 3 advanced degrees in conservation science and a family name that opened doors for your gallery in the first place, she replied. A lifetime of quiet acquiescence finally cracking. When they arrived home, the sprawling house felt cavernous with their silence. Amara removed her jewelry piece by piece, watching her reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back seemed different somehow. Dash awakened. Her phone chimed with a message from an unknown. Number, your restoration of the veil wasn't just technical brilliance, it was an act of seeing what others missed. I'm working on a project documenting forgotten artisans across Asia. We should talk. Julian Castellano attached was an image, a close-up photograph of her hands working on the veil. Taken during the restoration process years ago, she hadn't even known he'd been there, documenting the work. In the photograph, her fingers appeared, illuminated, almost sacred, in their careful preservation of history. Julian had seen her, Lulianne seen her long before tonight. Dawood appeared in the doorway of their bedroom. The Jensens are investing in the Ottoman exhibition, he said flatly. Despite your friend's dramatic performance, Amara looked up from the phone, meeting his gaze in the mirror. His name is Julian Castellano, and he just offered me a project. Something flashed across Dawood's face, surprise, then calculation. That could be good for the gallery. He didn't offer it to the gallery, Amara replied quietly. He offered it to me. Threads unraveling the conservation studio at the back of the gallery had always been Amara's sanctuary. Mornings arrived with slanted sunlight through high windows, illuminating her workbench where damaged textiles were transformed under her patient hands. Today, however, the familiar space felt different, constricting rather than comforting. 3 weeks had passed since Julian Castellano's toast had turned her invisible existence into something suddenly, uncomfortably visible. The gallery hummed with a new energy. Dawood had hastily arranged a special exhibition highlighting the conservation. Department's worker work, though, the placards still emphasized the grand. Galleria's commitment to preservation rather than Amara's specific contributions. The lighting needs to be adjusted on the Ottoman kaftan display, the Wood announced, entering her workspace without knocking. Since the gala, he had developed a sudden interest in her daily activities. "In the Castellano project, have you given it more thought?" Mara carefully set down her tweezers before answering. "I have. I'm meeting with him this afternoon to discuss details." "Excellent. I've cleared my schedule to join you." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "That won't be necessary. This is a personal project, not a gallery collaboration." Dawood's expression hardened. "There's no such thing as a personal project when you're married to the gallery's owner. Amara, everything we do reflects on our brand." "Our brand," she repeated softly. "Is that what we are now?" He sighed, running a hand through his meticulously styled hair. "Don't be difficult, you know what I mean? Your sudden recognition is beneficial for both of us, but we need to manage it. Carefully manage it?" Something cold settled in her stomach. "You mean control it?" "I mean maximize it," he corrected, his tone shifting to the smooth persuasiveness he used with reluctant investors. "Julian Castellano's interest is an opportunity. With the right approach, we could secure international partnerships, maybe even a feature in Art Forum." Mara turned back to her work, a fraying silk tapestry that had survived centuries only to nearly disintegrate in a poorly climate-controlled private collection. Each thread required individual attention, patient, focused. "Care to restore what had been neglected?" "I'll be meeting him alone," she said quietly, not looking up. Dawood's hand came down on her workbench, just hard enough to make her instruments tremble. "This isn't up for discussion. We present a united front, always. That was our agreement." "No," she corrected, still focused on the delicate silk beneath her fingers. "That was your expectation. I don't recall agreeing to disappear." Later that afternoon, Amara sat across from Julian in a quiet tea house in Old Lahore, far from the gallery district where she might be recognized as Dawood Mirza's wife. The ancient building with its carved wooden balconies and stained glass windows felt like stepping into another century. "Thank you for meeting me," Julian said, pouring her a cup of fragrant cardamom tea. "I imagine things have been interesting since the gala." Amara smiled faintly. "That's one word for it." "Do you regret it, the attention?" She considered the question, watching steam rise from her cup. "I regret that it took someone else's recognition for me to recognize myself." Julian nodded, understanding. In his eyes, he slid a leather portfolio across the table. "These are photographs I've taken over the past decade. Artisans whose work sustains cultural heritage, but who remain anonymous. A weaver in Peru whose techniques date back to Incan times. Papermaker in Japan whose family has preserved the same methods for 15 generations. Amara carefully turned the pages, moving through a visual journey of hands weathered young, scarred steady, all engaged in acts of creation and preservation. "My next book focuses on textile preservation across Asia," Julian explained.
Ow.
"Not just the completed restorations that museums celebrate, but the actual process, the painstaking labor that few witness. I want to document your work on the Safavid period textiles recently discovered in Isfahan." "That would mean traveling to Iran," Amara said, her mind already racing through the implications. "For approximately 3 months, the conservation team there has requested your expertise specifically." He watched her carefully. "It would mean stepping away from the gallery." The realization settled over her like a familiar garment long forgotten in the back of a wardrobe, the shape of independence. How it might fit after all these years. That evening, she placed the contract Julian had given her on the dining table where Dawood couldn't miss it. 3 months in Iran?" he asked incredulously after reading it. "This is absurd. The gallery needs you here, does it?" Mara asked quietly. "Or do you suddenly need the prestige my work brings now that others value it?" Dawood's expression darkened. "Is that what this is about? Your moment in the spotlight has made you forget everything I've done for your career." "What exactly have you done for my career, Dawood? Besides keeping it carefully contained within these walls where it serves your purposes?" The argument that followed unearthed years of resentments, excavating truths long buried beneath politeness and compromise.
Ame Mara.
By midnight, Amara had moved. Her belongings into the guest bedroom, the contract for the Isfahan project signed and dated on her nightstand. In the darkness, she ran her fingers over the embroidery of her grandmother's shawl draped across the foot of the bed. The old woman had once told her that true artistry required not just skill, but courage, the willingness to pull threads and begin again. When a pattern no longer served its purpose, for the first time in years, Mara allowed herself to consider that some threads were meant to unravel. The gallery of Second Chances Isfahan's light had a quality Amara had never experienced before, golden and somehow textured, as if the ancient city filtered sunlight through layers of history before allowing it to touch the ground. The conservation laboratory at the Museum of Islamic Art hummed with quiet purpose, as specialists from 3 countries hunched over the recently discovered cache of Safavid textiles, ceremonial garments, and tapestries that had remained sealed. In a forgotten palace chamber for over 4 centuries, remarkable preservation, murmured Dr. Ferry Benazri, the head conservator, as she and Amara examined the intricate threadwork on a royal wedding garment. Look at how the silver threads have maintained their luster. Mara nodded, carefully photographing the section where pomegranate-based dye had created a pattern of birds in flight. The sealed cedar chest protected it from light damage. Looking at colors exactly as they appeared in the 16th century, 6 weeks into the project, Amara had settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. Her days were filled with meticulous work and collaboration with colleagues who valued her expertise without qualification. Her evenings were spent exploring Isfahan's architectural wonders or conversing with Julian, who documented their progress with his camera, somehow capturing not just the textiles but the reverence with which they were handled. "You look different." Here, Julian observed one evening as they sat in the tiled courtyard of her temporary apartment, the fountain's gentle splashing providing accompaniment to their conversation. "Different how?" Mara asked, pouring more saffron tea into his cup. "More present," he replied after consideration. "In Lahore, even when you were physically there, part of you seemed withheld, preserved elsewhere, like your textiles and their archival boxes." The observation struck her with its accuracy. "I suppose I was." Preservation becomes a habit, keeping parts of yourself protected from damage. Julian's camera sat on the table between them, silent but ever present. He hadn't photographed her directly since they'd arrived in Iran, respecting boundaries she hadn't explicitly stated, but that he somehow understood. "May I ask about Dawood?" he ventured. "You've hardly mentioned him since we arrived." Amara traced the rim of her teacup, gathering thoughts that had been swirling beneath the surface of her focused work. "He calls every few days. The conversations are strained. He's simultaneously angry about my absence and eager to know when the book featuring his gallery's conservation department will be published." "And what do you tell him?" "The truth, that this project has nothing to do with his gallery. That the book will feature my name, not his brand." She looked up at Julian. "I filed for separation papers. My lawyer sent them last week." Expression remained neutral, though his eyes reflected understanding rather than surprise. "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying," she admitted, "and necessary. Like removing a centuries-old varnish that was once applied to protect but now only obscures." Their professional relationship had developed an easy rhythm, Julian observing and documenting while Amara worked, occasionally discussing composition or lighting, but mostly existing in companionable focus on their respective crafts. There was something refreshing about being seen through the lens of her work rather than her connections or appearance. Meanwhile, in Lahore, Dawood was discovering that his gallery's reputation had become inextricably linked with Amara's expertise. Collectors who had previously dealt exclusively with him now asked about the conservation department's involvement in acquisitions. The separation papers had arrived like a thunderclap on a clear day, inconceivable in his ordered world, where prestigious marriages, like business mergers, simply didn't dissolve. "She'll come back," he assured his concerned board of directors. "This project is temporary. Amara understands her place is here." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept in. The woman who had signed those papers was not the accommodating presence who had stood quietly beside him for 8 years. Something fundamental had shifted. It's like Earth, after an earthquake appearing similar on the surface, but irreversibly rearranged beneath the Nisfahan. Amara's phone chimed with a message from her lawyer. Dawood was contesting the separation, claiming her sudden erratic behavior was being influenced by outside parties. He was demanding she return to Lahore immediately to discuss the matter, as family. That evening, Julian found her in the conservation lab long after others had left, methodically cleaning a delicate length of silk with tools that resembled a surgeon's instruments. "Bad news?" he asked, noting her intense concentration, the kind that, he had learned, usually indicated emotional turbulence channeled into precision work. "Dawood is being Dawood," she replied without looking up, attempting to control what he can no longer possess. Julian set his camera down and pulled up a stool across from her. "What will you do?" Finally she paused, meeting his gaze. "Finish what I started, this restoration, this book, this reclamation of myself." Her hands hovered over the ancient silk. These textiles survived centuries because someone believed they mattered enough to preserve. I'm beginning to think perhaps I matter enough too. Later that night, as midnight approached and the city quieted around them, they walked through Isfahan's Nakshi Jahan Square. The 17th century marvel with its illuminated palace and mosque domes reflected in the central pool, creating a double world of architectural perfection. "I've been photographing for 30 years, Julian said, as they paused by the water's edge. "But I never capture reflections well. They always appear less substantial than they are in person." "Perhaps some things can only be experienced, not recorded," Amara suggested. Julian turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "May I photograph you?" "Not for the book, just for now, for this moment." The request surprised her. "Why? Because you're seeing yourself clearly for perhaps the first time in years?" He answered simply, "I'd like to document that, even if no one else ever sees it." Amara considered, then nodded. Julian raised his camera, capturing her against the backdrop of the illuminated Sheikh Latfala Mosque. Its intricate dome a testament to artistry that had survived centuries. What passed between them in that moment wasn't romance in any conventional sense, but recognition to people who had spent their lives seeing beauty others overlooked, finally turning that same careful attention toward each other. Tapestry reborn autumn painted Lahore in shades of amber and gold when Amara returned, nearly 5 months after her departure. The city welcomed her with familiar scents, jasmine and exhaust, cardamom and coal fires, but she moved through it differently now. No longer seeing herself as merely an extension of the Grand Galleria or the Mirza name, the Zahan project had been completed with international acclaim. The textiles, now carefully preserved, would tell their centuries-old stories to new generations. Julian's photographs documenting the process had been featured in prestigious publications, always with Amara's name and credentials prominently mentioned. Their professional collaboration had evolved into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. Connection, unlike any she had experienced before. The divorce had been finalized in her absence, after Dawood finally realized that fighting would only create public spectacle. He had offered a generous settlement in exchange for her discretion and her continued consultation on certain gallery pieces, terms she had accepted with the clarity of someone who no longer needed to prove her worth. Heavy wooden doors of her family's ancestral home in the old city, a place she had visited but never truly inhabited during her marriage. Amara felt a circle completing. The carved door swung open to reveal her Aunt Shirin, silver-haired and sharp-eyed at 72. "So the wanderer returns," Shirin said, embracing her, and with new lines around her eyes, good lines, the kind that come from looking outward instead of inward. The house, with its central courtyard and rooms arranged around it like chapters in a story, had stood for nearly 2 centuries. Generations of Nur women had lived here, many practicing traditional arts that had been passed down through careful instruction. Amara's grandmother had restored royal garments in the eastern room, where light was clearest in the mornings. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Shirin said as they settled in the courtyard with tea. "Converting part of the house into a conservation studio and training center. It has merit." "There's funding secured," Amara explained, excitement coloring her voice. "The Isfahan project connected me with institutions willing to sponsor training. For young conservators, we could preserve techniques that are disappearing while creating employment for women who need it. Chiron studied her niece over the rim of her teacup. And what of Julian Castellano? Will he be involved in this venture? Amara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. His foundation is providing part of the funding. And yes, he'll document the process. For a follow-up book, but he remains based in Madrid. We are colleagues with deep respect for one another. Chiron hummed skeptically. I've seen how he photographs you, not like someone capturing an image, but like someone witnessing a revelation. But no matter. Colleagues, then. Over the following weeks, Amara transformed the eastern wing of the family home. Walls were reinforced, specialized lighting installed, and climate control systems carefully integrated into the historical structure without compromising its integrity. Workbenches crafted by local artisans were positioned to maximize natural light while protecting delicate textiles from direct sun damage. Word spread quickly through Lahore's art community. The woman who had once been merely Dawood Mirza's conservator wife was establishing something unprecedented, a space where historical preservation techniques would be taught alongside contemporary conservation science. On the evening before the studio's official opening, Mara found herself alone in the main workspace, running her fingers along the smooth wooden surfaces, remembering her grandmother doing the same decades earlier. The sound of the courtyard gate opening pulled her from her reverie. Julian stood in the doorway, camera bag slung over his shoulder, earlier than expected for the opening events. You weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow, she said, surprise and pleasure mingling in her voice. I wanted to see this place as it is now, before it becomes what it will be, he explained, setting down his bag. Amara understood. It was what they both did in their work capture. Moments of transition, preserve them, honor them. May I? He asked, gesturing to his camera. She nodded, continuing her preparations as he photographed the space, not staging anything, simply documenting the reality of a dream taking physical form. The click of his shutter created a gentle rhythm as she moved around the studio, placing tools and materials for the next day's demonstrations. I received an interesting call yesterday, Julian said casually as he adjusted his lens. From Dawood. Mara's hands stilled. What did he want? To warn me, I think? Though he phrased it as concern for your well-being. Julian's expression remained neutral. He suggested you were going through a predictable phase of rebellion and would eventually come to your senses. A laugh escaped her, genuine, tethered. And what did you tell him? That I've photographed ancient textiles that have survived conquests, natural disasters, and centuries of neglect. That I recognize resilience when I see it. Julian set his camera down, meeting her gaze directly. And that you are the most clear-sighted person I've ever met. Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition that they're careful. Professional distance had become a fiction neither needed to maintain. We've been colleagues for nearly a year now, Amara said quietly. We have. Think perhaps we could be more than colleagues. Julian's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in the way she had come to cherish. I think perhaps we already are. The next morning, the studio opened to considerable attention from both local and international press. Young women from across Pakistan had applied for the inaugural training program, many from regions where traditional textile arts were fading from memory. As Amara guided visitors through the space, explaining conservation techniques and the importance of preserving cultural heritage, she caught glimpses of Julian moving through the crowd, camera raised, capturing moments that others might miss. Dawood made an appearance, immaculately dressed and appropriately congratulatory. The gallery owner persona firmly in place. He air-kissed her cheek and commented on the charming authenticity of the space, as if reviewing another exhibition. You could have done something like this at the gallery, he said quietly, when they had a moment apart from others. Could have built this together. Amara regarded him with neither resentment nor regret. No, Dawood. You wanted to build something that looked like this but served your purposes. There's a difference. His expression flickered between irritation and grudging respect. You've changed. No, she corrected gently. I've been restored. Later as evening fell and the last guest departed, Amara found herself in the courtyard with Julian. The sound of the fountain mixing with distant city noise, He handed her a small package wrapped in handmade paper. Inside was a book, the finished product of their Isfahan project. She opened it to find not only the expected photographs of the conservation process, but an unexpected dedication page to Amara Nur, who taught me that the most profound art lies in seeing what remains when everything superficial has been carefully removed. The true restoration is always of vision, the ability to perceive what was there all along, waiting to be recognized. As she looked up from the page, Julian raised his camera one final time, capturing her expression in the gentle courtyard light, a woman fully seen, finally in focus.